But in recent years, we're beginning to use computers in more creative ways. So there are three ways in which computers are being used to do mathematics, which I think are really exciting, particularly when they are combined with each other and with the more classical databases, tables, and symbolic computation, scientific computation. So first of all, we're using machine learning, neural networks, to discover new connections and find out ways in which different types of mathematics are correlated in ways that you would not see as a human, or unlikely to see as a human. Most splashily, there's large language models, which are, in some sense, very large versions of machine learning algorithms, which can take natural language, like ChatGPT and Cloud and so forth, and they can sometimes generate possible proofs, approaches to problems, which sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. You'll see a bit more examples of this actually in the talk after mine. But then there's also another technology which is just becoming usable by the everyday mathematician, which are called formal proof assistants. So these are languages. So computer languages you're used to using to write executable code. Programs that do things. Formal proof assistants are languages that you write to check things, to check whether a certain argument is actually true and actually gives you the conclusion from the data. And these have been fairly annoying to use until very recently, and they're becoming now somewhat easy to use, and they're facilitating a lot of interesting math projects that wouldn't have been possible without these proof assistants. And they will combine very well in the future with the other tools that I described here. So I want to talk about sort of these more modern ways to use machines and computers to do mathematics. So I think I started with proof assistants. Yeah. So the first really computer-assisted proof, maybe in history, was the proof of the four-color theorem. Every planar map can be colored in using only four colors. That was proven in 1976. This was before proof assistants. There wasn't really. It wouldn't really be called a computer proof nowadays. It's a proof which it was a massive computation, like half of which was done by a computer and half of which was done by humans. The way they prove the four-color theorem is that you basically induct on the number of countries, and you show that if you have a massive map, there is some subgraph of countries. There's a produced a list of about 1,000, 2,000 special subgraphs. And every big graph of countries had to contain, in some sense, one of these subgraphs. That was one thing they had to check. And then they had to check that every time you had a subgraph, you could replace that subgraph with something simpler. And if you could four-color the simpler thing, you could color the main thing. And you had to check these properties. I think they're called dischargeability and reducibility for each of these 1,000 or so graphs. I think one of these tasks they could do by computer, although this was a 1970s computer. I think they had to enter in each graph by hand into this one program and check it. The other task though was actually done by a human computer. One of the daughters of one of the authors actually had to spend hours and hours just manually checking this. I think the reducibility thing. It was very tedious. And the process was not perfect. There were lots of little mistakes, and they had to update the table. So it was not, by modern standards, a computer verifiable proof. That came much later in the 90s, where there was a simpler proof using a mere 700 or so graphs. But now all the things that need to be checked, it was a very precise, well-defined list of properties, and you could write code in your favorite computer language, C or Python or something, and you can check it in a couple pages, in a couple hundred lines of code, in like a few minutes with a modern computer. And then to actually check that it's completely to write a proof that goes all the way down to the axioms of mathematics, that was done in 2005 using a proof assistant language called Koch. I think it's now renamed Roch. So that was one of the first proofs. And we see there's a huge gap between sort of when the proof first appeared and then when we actually could completely verify by computer. Another famous example is the Kepler conjecture for sphere packing. This is a really old conjecture of Kepler from the 17th century. It's very easy to state. You take a whole bunch of unit spheres, and you want to cover three-dimensional space as efficiently as possible. So there's sort of an obvious way to try to pack spheres. It's just a triangular packing. like the way you pack oranges at a grocery store, there's also a dual packing called the cubic packing, which has the same density. So there's a density of about 74%, which is sort of the obvious packing. And the question is that the best possible? And this turns out to be a surprisingly hard problem. In 2 dimensions, the hexagonal packing is not too hard to show. It's the best. Only very recently, in 8 and 24 dimensions, do we know the answer as a great work of Yosovska. Maybe she talked about it yesterday. But 3 3 is the only other case that we know of, except for 1, which is trivial. But yeah, it was surprisingly difficult to prove. Again, there was no completely human readable proof of this conjecture. There is a strategy. So of course the problem is that there's infinitely many of these of these spheres, and the density is an asymptotic thing. So it's not a priori a finite problem that you can just throw at a computer. But you can try to reduce it to a finite problem. So there's a strategy proposed by Toth in the 50s. So every time you have a packing, it subdivides space into these polyhedra called Voronoi regions. Okay, so the Voronoi polytope of a sphere is just all the points which are closer to the center of that sphere than to all the other spheres. Okay, so you can sort of split up space into all these polytopes, and these polytopes have certain volumes. You can also count their faces and their surface areas and so forth. And so they all have these statistics. And the volumes, like the packing density, is very closely related to sort of the average volume of these regions. So if you can say something about kind of how these volumes of these polytopes behave on average, then you could get at least maybe some upper bound onto how efficient these packings can be. And you can try to make relations between these polytopes. Like if one polytope is very big, maybe this forces the nearby ones to be very small. And so maybe you can try to find some inequalities connecting the volume of one Voronoi cell to another. And so Toth proposed maybe you should just collect lots and lots of these inequalities and then do some linear program or something, and hopefully you can just derive the right bound of this magic pi over 3 of root 2, which is the right density, from all these inequalities. So people tried this. There were many attempts. Some even claim success, but none have been accepted as actual proofs. The problem was eventually solved first by Thomas Hales and his co-authors. He did basically the same strategy, but using there are lots of technical tweaks. He changed the cells from Voronoi cells to slightly more fancy cells. And instead of taking the volume, he invented this thing called the score that you assign to each of these. It's the volume plus or minus lots of little ad hoc adjustments. But again, with the aim of trying to create all these linear inequalities between these different scores, and to eventually get upper bounds of the density and to hopefully hit exactly the optimal density. It's a very flexible method. Actually, it's sort of too flexible because there's too many things you can try. There's so many ways you can set up the score and so forth. So there's a quote here. So Samuel Ferguson was the co-author. Sorry, I've forgotten the name. So Hales and Ferguson realized that every time he encountered problems in trying to minimize his functionals and so forth, he could just change the score and try it again. But then all the things that they checked already, they had to redo. And so the scoring function became more and more complicated. They worked on this for almost a decade, I think. And it became more and more complicated. But with each change, we cut months or years from our work. This incessant fiddling was unpopular with our colleagues. Every time I presented my work in progress at a conference, I was minimizing a different function. Even worse, the function was mildly incompatible with what I did in earlier papers, and this required going back and patching the earlier papers. But they eventually did it. So in 1998, they announced that they had finally found a score which obeyed a whole bunch of linear inequalities and in 150 variables, which they minimized and got their thing. Initially, they did not plan to make this a computer-assisted proof, but as the project became more and more complicated, it was inevitable. They had to use more and more computers. The proof was enormous by the standards of 1998. It was 250 pages of notes and 3 gigabytes of computer programs and data. It actually had a very tough time getting refereed. Yeah, so it got sent to the top journal of mathematics, one of the top, the Annals of Mathematics. And yeah, it took 4 years to referee with a panel of 12 referees. And at the end, they said they were 99% certain of the correctness of the proof, but they could not certify the correctness of the computer calculations. And they did a very unusual thing, actually, is that they published the paper with a little caveat from the editors saying this. They have since removed that caveat, actually. At the time, there was a lot more controversy as to whether a computer-assisted proof qualified as an actual proof. Now, I think we are much more comfortable with it. But even after it was published, there was doubt about whether it was really, really a proof. So this was maybe the first major high-profile problem where there was really a big incentive to really formalize this in a completely, all the way down to first principles in a formal proof language. And so Hales, in fact, created a language, a modification of existing languages to do this. He called it the FlySpec project. He estimated it would take 20 years to formalize his proof. But actually, with the help of 21 collaborators, he actually finally accomplished it in a mere 12 years. And it finally appeared in 2014. Okay, so we now have sort of complete confidence in this particular result. But it was quite a painful thing to do.